शुरू कर दें। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन वस्सलातु वस्सलामु अला रसूलिल्लाहि व अला आलिहि व सहबिहि अजमईन रब्बि इश्रह ली सदरी व यस्सिर ली अमरी वहलुल उक़दतम मिन लिसानी यफ़क़हू क़ौली। अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू। Inshallah, in today's talk about the life of Uthman bin Affan radiyallahu an, we'll talk about some of the specific ijtihadat of Uthman bin Affan radiyallahu an. And the purpose of specifically talking about Uthman's ijtihadat is so we have an understanding of a very important subject that causes many a times differences among us, and we don't realize that there is a solution that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within the Sharia that solves the differences of opinions that can exist among the Ummah. As we have kind of hinted in the past, when it comes to differences of opinions, they can be triggered for different kinds of actions, that the actions which are related to a person himself, or personal things, for example, the way he dresses, the way he's an honest person, and the way what he eats, these are very personal to himself. Second kind of differences can happen with the ibadat, meaning directly worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the third one, which is about the mu'amalat, that you are dealing with different people and you can have differences, and this is where really the conflicts happen. And people like to know that how to resolve those conflicts. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed us a principle for us that solves the problems or the conflicts that can happen in differences of opinions. To be very clear, that when we say differences of opinion, it means those are the differences that are allowed in Islam. Meaning, when we are approaching the Quran and the Sunnah, when we approach the Quran and Sunnah, there can be differences based on the understanding of the text or differences in the principles, the usul al-fiqh that are used by the mujtahideen, and that can cause differences which has a validity within Islam. Now, the problem comes here is when there are transactions between the people and differences are there, how do you resolve them? And this is where it's important for us to understand when we are studying Uthman's life, and we are talking about his era when he was Amirul Mu'mineen. So when he adopted an opinion as a Khalifa, as the one head of the state, which are adopted for the state, then everybody under the subject of the state at that time, they have to follow the opinions of the Amirul Mu'mineen. As we talked about when we were talking about life of Abu Bakr and Umar, Abu Bakr had different understanding about when it comes to distribution of the ghanima, and he used to distribute it evenly among the Sahaba or his subject, while Umar disagreed with that. But when he was under Umar's leadership, he continued to follow what Abu Bakr adopted. But when Umar became the Amir al-Mu'mineen himself at that time, then the distribution was according to his understanding, which was he understood that the ones who enter into fold of Islam earlier, they have more right than the one who enter into Islam later on. Hence, Umar's understanding was they should be given more share compared to the one who fought against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or entered into Islam way later than the one who were the earlier Muslims. So this is what trying to show here is this is how the differences are resolved, and there are many evidences that we have talked in the past as well. So today we'll talk about some of the examples of the ijtihadat of Uthman. So some of them we will see which are very personal to him, and they do not apply on the state level, while the others were the ones which are applied on the state level. So that included, some of them were related to ibadat, for example, or qisas, or hudud, or some disciplinary punishments which are called ta'zir. And Uthman played a huge role in the development of the schools of thoughts later on. So many of his opinions were taken by the later scholars, including the mujtahideen of different types. As we know that mujtahideen can be of different types. Mujtahid mutlaq, the one who has his own usul, or the madhab, the one who follows somebody else's usul, and the masala, the one who can do the ijtihad in certain things, one or more issues. Now, when it comes to Uthman, Uthman, when he was praying in the Mina. Mina is the place when you go for Hajj or Umrah. In general, people pray, they do the qasr. Qasr means they shorten the prayers. Yeah? And while Uthman he started praying 4 rak'ah. While Abdurrahman bin Auf, someone went to Abdurrahman bin Auf and said, look, Uthman is praying 4 rak'ah over there, while he is coming from Medina. And he asked, do you know about this? So Abdurrahman bin Auf went to him and he said that he, first of all himself, he led his companions with 2 rak'ah. I'm talking about shortening the prayer, right? When we are traveling, we are aware of that. When a person shortens, so Dhuhr and Asr and Isha, they become, instead of 4, you pray 2 rak'ah. When it comes to Maghrib and Fajr, they stay 2 and 3. There is no reduction in those. So this is what I was talking about. And Abdurrahman bin Auf, he continued to pray 2 rak'ah. Now, even though he is the Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is not something that Amir al-Mu'mineen would adopt and everybody has to follow, because this is the act of ibadah. Yeah. So, and as a matter of fact, if somebody is not a musafir, he is the one who is he's hadir, or he's a resident of a place, then he can continue to pray 4 rak'ah. As we know, if we are praying behind somebody who is a musafir, he's praying to the one who is a resident, he will just get up and pray the rest of the missing prayers, the rak'ah. Now, Uthman, when Abdurrahman bin Auf went to him and he said, he asked him, didn't you pray 2 rak'ah when you were with Abu Bakr? He said, yes. And he said, didn't you pray 2 rak'ah when you were with Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu? He was the leader. He said, yes. And he said, didn't you also pray 2 rak'ah before? He said, yes. He said, then why are you praying 4 rak'ah now? And Uthman's response was to him, oh Abu Muhammad. Abu Muhammad is referring to, is a kunya of Abdurrahman bin Auf. He said that the people of Yemen and some rough people who came to Hajj last year, and they were praying as residents. They thought of it that Uthman is a resident, why is he praying 2 rak'ah? Basically, they were questioning this. And Uthman did not want to have any kind of a confusion, and hence he started praying 4 rak'ah. The point here is, Uthman knew that this is he can pray 2 rak'ah, but he was praying 4 because it is permissible. See, when you are a traveler, in the traveler's prayer, it's not an obligation that you must shorten. Okay, even though there's some strange opinions say that it's a must, but in general the Jamhur's understanding is it's not an obligation for you to pray to shorten the prayer. So he was trying to show that. Okay, another thing which was related to the salah, and nowadays that we hear that all the time, that for Salatul Jum'ah, for example, people make 2 adhans for Salatul Jum'ah. Yeah. Now those 2 adhan were not made in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, for example. There was only 1 adhan for Salatul Jum'ah. Same thing goes when for Abu Bakr and Umar time, but in the time of Uthman, he started making 2 adhans. And the idea behind 2 adhans was not that now Salatul Jum'ah has 2 adhans, rather the ruling of Islam expanded quite a bit in the time of Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh. And hence the first adhan was more of a call for the people to start gathering for Salatul Jum'ah. Like for example, when we pray, we just pray Salatul Dhuhr. For the adhan for Salatul Dhuhr could happen quite before we do the Jama'ah. Yeah, this is more for let the people know its time has started. Yeah, but the time for the Jama'ah is different. And people gather and then they do the salah at that appointed time of the Jama'ah. So hence, that idea of having 2 adhan in the time of Uthman was one for more for gathering the people, and second one, when Imam gets on the mimbar, when he sits down, this is the time the adhan, the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was made, and hence it started happening in the time of Uthman. So he was not doing a bid'ah per se, but rather that adhan was for calling the people. It's no different than for Fajr prayers also. There are the places where they do 2 adhans for Salatul Fajr. One is actually prior to the Fajr time to wake the people up. And some people can even perform tahajjud if they like to. And then the second one, which is the time of the Fajr has entered, then the second the adhan is made. and it was done in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's not a bid'ah, it's not something new that was started. It was more of a calling people. Okay, related to salah, one time Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh, he was leading the prayer, he finished the prayer, and then he realized that he was in the state of junub. He was state of impurity that requires ghusl, because he did not see the marks of the semen on his clothes that could tell him that he needed to take a ghusl. Now he has already prayed, and people are gone. He realized that now. Now he did not gather the people all and tell them, you have to pray also, because the ruling regarding this subject in general, most of those fuqaha, including Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmad, and Auza'i rahimahullah alayhim ajma'in, and amongst other scholars also, their understanding was that if imam has led the prayer and he did not realize during the leading the prayer that he was not in the state of purity that you require, and ablution that is required. Now if he finishes like that, then he needs to repeat the salah, but not the one who prayed behind him. Okay, even though Ahnaf have a different opinion on the subject, but in general the opinion is that. Now there's one subject that everybody agrees on, is if the people who are praying behind, they are aware that Imam does not have wudu, then it's not allowed. Then you cannot pray. Like you are well aware that person does not have wudu. You heard him, for example, breaking the wudu, or you heard him going to saw him somehow that he does not have wudu. So in that case, the prayer will not be valid in those cases. But Uthman bin Affan, when it happened to him, he did not tell the others to repeat the prayer, but he himself repeated the prayer. Similarly, when it comes to ibadat, but this is very personal things. Ibadah is an act of worship between Allah and the person. He was of the understanding that about the sujood al-tilawa, which is the prostration for the recitation of the Quran. He says that the ones who listens, meaning listening is different, by the way. Somebody reciting the Quran passes by another person, he's not listening to that Quran, he's not obliged to make the sajda. While the one who is listening, he's there for listening to the Quran. For example, you are praying behind somebody and the ayah of the prostration comes, then he has to make the sajda. Now, Jamhur, majority of the scholars' opinion is it's an act of sunnah. It's not an obligation. Okay. Now, Uthman bin Affan was referred as the one who knows the most about the rituals of the Hajj when it comes to the knowledge. He's the one who knows the most, and after that, Abdullah bin Umar. Now, the brothers and the sisters who have been to Hajj, they would know that when it comes to Hajj, and the one who study the subject of the Hajj, Hajj has a lot of variation, differences of opinions in there. Many differences of opinions, and it's because there's very few things which are they must be done. Many of those things besides that are just the du'as or takbirat that we are doing there. Okay. Now, in the case of one time a man came to Uthman bin Affan, which is the case of halala. I'm not sure if anybody of you have heard the term halala. A man came to Uthman and he wanted to ask him some question. Uthman was in a hurry. Uthman said, okay, I'm in a hurry. If you really have to ask this question, get on my mount and talk while I'm riding. So he started asking him a question. He said that I have a neighbor who divorced his wife in a moment of anger. And now he's very upset. He wants to return back to his wife. So he said, I want to seek reward by marrying her, consummating the marriage, and I could divorce her, and then she can get married back to the neighbor. Now, in Islam, this is not allowed, by the way. Okay, you cannot marry somebody for this specific purpose that you are going to marry with this intention you're going to divorce. Okay, you cannot. This is not valid kind of a marriage contract. Hence, Uthman told him, do not marry the woman if you're not serious about keeping her as your wife. You cannot just marry for this person. And there's a lot of mess was created in, I'm aware of countries like Pakistan, for example. In Pakistan, and they kind of try to ridicule Sharia laws by the way, Sharia law is a very wrong transit way of saying the things, because Sharia means law and law means law. So you cannot say law. Sharia al-Islamiyya is probably the right terminology, that the law of Islam. So Islamic laws, they try to ridicule this way, that, oh, okay, so if somebody has divorced his wife, okay, there are people out there who are willing to do the halala. Marry him, just divorce her, and then you can get married. No, this is not the right way of doing it, and Uthman bin Affan made sure that this doesn't happen. Similarly, and by the way, when he's now dealing with these issues, these are adopted issues by Uthman, so people cannot go on and do these kind of actions under his leadership. In Uthman's time, his understanding was, if a drunkard person who cannot tell right or wrong, drinking is haram, that's the one issue, and the person can be punished for drinking. But if a person, he divorces his wife while he is drunk, that divorce is not acceptable, because he is not aware of what he is saying, and hence this divorce was not accepted in the time of Uthman bin Affan. And there are many ahadith that talks about this subject. Even it talks about subject of extreme anger if a person is in. Obviously, people normally do not divorce their wife for something just because they're very nice and happy with them and giggling and then they're divorcing each other. This is not how it works. People are upset, they have some anger, something is there, that this is why normally in general life people divorce. So just anger is not sufficient to say that if somebody gives a divorce in anger, then divorce is not valid. But if the anger is to a limit, there are some people, they get the angry so much that they are fuming out of anger, and they literally cannot distinguish right and wrong anymore. That's the state of anger that a hadith talks about, that the divorce is not acceptable in that state. Again, it all goes back to the state of mind. If the mind is not under control, in those cases it is not, the divorce does not happen. Similarly, the hadith that talks about upon three people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised his qalam, that talks about a person who is, I don't remember the order, but a majnoon person, the person who is whose mind does not work. Second person who is sleeping, and if he does an action, then he is not accountable for his actions until he wakes up. Or the child who has not reached the puberty. All these three cases, we see that the mind is the key thing, which is either not working or it has not reached the perfection or the capability of thinking correctly. Okay. On the same note, there is a concept in Islam which is called hajar. Hajar is, you prevent somebody to use his own wealth. When does this happen? If there's a person who is a safih, or who is a foolish person who does not really know the value of the money, for example, or he just wastes the money in a very extravagant way. Okay. Now, in the time of Uthman would put a guardian for a person who does not have the skill to use the money. He could be a mature person, meaning from the perspective of balugha, he's an adult. But if he does not have the mind who can use the wealth properly, then in that case, a guardian can be placed by the state. When I'm saying state, it could be the qadi. It doesn't have to be everything goes back to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen can have people under him who are acting on his behalf. Now, so Abdullah bin Ja'far, the son of Ja'far bin Abi Talib, radiallahu anhuma, he bought some land for 60,000 dinars. 60,000 dinars is a huge amount of money, by the way. Yeah. So news reached to Ali bin Abi Talib. He decided the land was not worth this much money. Okay. So he took it to Uthman, because Uthman was a Khalifa at that time. It's not Ali. So Ali goes to Uthman and he requests that, look, this is what had happened. Now, while he went there, Abdullah bin Ja'far went to Zubayr bin al-Awwam. Zubair bin Awwam radiallahu an, he's a cousin of Ali radiallahu an, or Rasulullah and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. So he went to Zubair. And so for him, Zubair is like an uncle. So he went to Zubair radiallahu an, and he told him, look, this is what has happened, I have bought this. So Zubair said, okay. And Zubair was famous to be a smart person, smart businessman. Okay. So he said, okay, I make the partnership with you. Now I'm the partner with you. So now if he's the partner, and now Uthman asked them to come to take a look what's going on. And now when Ali mentioned this, Uthman said to Ali, how can I impose a ban on a man whose business partner is Zubair? Now Zubair bin Awwam is a very sharp guy. So now he already has kind of a person who is taking care of the wealth now. But to understand the ruling in a general way, if a person is not aware of how to use the money, or he is a waster, by the way, that could be a gambler. He could be a good businessman, go out there, do a good business, but he becomes a gambler. And if any of you have met people who are into gambling, they would use all the wealth they have. They will even sell their house, cars, whatever they have for the sake of gambling. Gambling is like a sickness, and it hits the mind in a manner that person really does not have any control anymore. It's pretty much like drugs. So I'm just giving an example of gambling. Of course, gambling itself is haram. But if a person is in that kind of circumstances, states intervene to the individual's life and put the hajar, which is, hajar can mean just a stone, but you are preventing the access to the wealth. He can get the access to the wealth when he is mature and he has control over. It's no different than, by the way, when Allah Azza wa Jal talks about the people who are yatim, for example, that when they reach the puberty, when they are able to distinguish right and wrong, at that time their guardians can give the wealth back to those youth. Now, in Islam, there's another concept which is called kanz, or hoarding. And Uthman made sure that hoarding of anything is not allowed in Islam. Okay. And he implemented that rules to make sure there is no hoarding happens. And this, it looks like a very minor thing probably from an outsider's perspective, but it has huge implications on the economy of a state, by the way. Yeah? How many of you remember the stimulus checks were given out through the COVID? Yeah? The reason for the COVID stimulus checks was what? So people start spending money. And when the money is spent, what happens? Then the economy starts moving. More job opportunities come out. And then wealth is in cycle. It moves from one hand to another hand. Now, in the case of hoarding, what happens is a person who has wealth, he can hold on to the wealth and does not spend. He may spend for his needs, for example, okay? But he does not spend besides that, and the wealth can be sitting in their vaults, in their banks, or if people have the old mentalities, maybe in the mattresses, or they will dig up a hole and put a pot in there with the gold and silver and the money. That is not allowed in Islam. Person can save money for his needs. For example, he wants to buy a house, he wants to get married, he wants to buy a car, he wants to do a business. There's a need is there. So in those cases, it is allowed to save the money, and the money is not in cycle yet. But the money which is besides that, it must be in cycle. By the way, even the person has paid the zakah. You cannot just hoard the money. It has to be spent. And this is what done in the time of Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh. He made sure that there is no hoarding happen, and if a person has more wealth, he has to invest it somehow, and when it's invested, automatically more job opportunities are created, and the money switches the hands, and this way, the one who have wealth, they do not exploit the one who do not have wealth. Yeah. Let me give you an example so it makes more sense. What happens is, if a person has, let's say, there are people out there who have $500 billion of wealth, and they just hold on to their wealth. And while there's other part of the population is suffering to the point they cannot even fulfill their basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter. Now, what happens in that case now? Those people, because they don't have access to the wealth, and then they start running out of wealth. And whatever they have, they are willing to give it up. Yeah, they are willing to give it up for whatever. And the people who are rich, they will come in and they will buy out all those things at a very low price. It could be their own houses, they could their cars, whatever they have. And then afterwards, when they are able to somehow make some money, because now kind of you become enslaved to the rich, then they will sell the very same things back to them at a very high rate. And hence, this exploitation of the rich or the strong towards the weak continues on. So Islam actually goes and it's kind of a nip in the bud, like from the roots it stops it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about that, وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ وَلَا يُنْفِقُونَها فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَبَشِّرْهُم بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ يَوْمَ يُحْمَى عَلَيْهَا فِي نَارِ جَهَنَّمَ فَتُكْوَى بِهَا جِبَاهُهُمْ وَجُنُوبُهُم وَظُهُورُهُم هذا ما كنزتم لأنفسكم فذوقوا ما كنتم تكنزون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is saying, talking about the people who do the hoarding of the gold and the silver and do not spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah says, tell them about the punishment, severe punishment. And then Allah also talks about that they will be branded with what they were hoarding with their jibahuhum wa junubuhum wa dhuhurum, talking about their foreheads, their sides and the backs. They will be branded with that on the Day of Judgment. There's a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about a person who was from the ashab, you know those people who used to be ashab sufa, which is the outside of Masjid Nabawi, the poor sahaba, ashab sufa. They used to be sitting there, and they were learning from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At the same time, from the wealth-wise, they were dependent on others to provide them something. One of them died, and when they removed his cloak, they found, in one hadith talks about 1 dinar, another one found 2 dinar. Okay, 1 or 2 dinar is not sufficient, by the way, for what? For zakah even. Yeah? Which is about 8.5 gram, if it's 2 dinar. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he saw that, because this person was holding on to these 2 dinars, but he was asking for money from others. So that's considered as hoarding as well, even though it's a small amount. And it's not the issue of zakah is paid or not, by the way. So hence, this is considered as kanz, and Rasulullah said he will be branded by this, what he was hoarding. Okay? So it's some of the opinions do exist. They talk about as if that if you paid the zakah on your wealth, then you can hoard as much wealth as you want. No, that's not true. Because these guys Rasulullah talked about were the ones who did not even have enough wealth to give the zakat. And for them, Rasulullah said they will be branded. Okay. Let's see. So a couple of more examples about his ijtihadat, and inshallah we'll move on for today's talk. There is a concept about inheritance. And there are people who think that they can make sure that the inheritors that he has will not get inheritance from him. You cannot do that in Islam. In Islam, what Allah has decided as your inheritors, they will get the inheritance after you die. Because once you die, it's not your wealth. It's not your wealth. It belongs to the ones who inherited it. As a matter of fact, everything in the world belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah makes us temporary owners in this world. And as we die, now it has to go. Yes, Allah has allowed a person to give a will of 1/3 of the wealth can be given in sadaqah, whichever way he wants, after he even dies. But that's the max is allowed, as according to hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that 1/3 cannot be given to any of those members who are already inheriting. Nowadays people think of it, oh, you know what, I want to make sure all my children, boys and girls, they should get exact same inheritance. No, Allah has decided something else. So you must go by what Allah has decided. So similarly, there are people, for whatsoever reason, they are angry at their wife or something, and while they're on the deathbed or something, they would divorce their wife. Okay, so she will not get the inheritance from him. For that, Uthman bin Affan, radiallahu anh, he said, actually it happened to Abdurrahman bin Auf. He divorced his wife when he was sick. He was not the one who was trying to deprive her of this, but he was sick at that time. So Uthman allowed her to inherit from him after her iddah ended. Meaning, he died while she was still in iddah. And when you are in iddah, you are still the wife. Iddah is a waiting period after the divorce. So he says she will get that inheritance. And it was narrated by Shuraih that he wrote to Umar ibn Khattab about a man who divorced his wife 3 times when he was sick. And Umar replied, let her inherit from him so long as she was still in the iddah. But he said when he died, if her iddah had ended, then he cannot inherit. This is Umar's opinion. So in the time of Umar, this was happened. In the time of Uthman, now he is Amir al-Mu'mineen. When he adopts, then it will be applied to all. So his opinion was that whether she is out of the iddah or in the iddah. But if the person was on his deathbed and he divorces, then you cannot deprive your wife of the inheritance that you are going to get. Okay, so yeah, inshallah we'll stop here. Just want to remind the main purpose of talking about these ijtihadat is, so we understand that Islam teaches us how to take care of differences of opinions. When there's a state there, it removes those differences that cause conflicts. Today, because we don't have Amir al-Mu'mineen over us who can adopt an opinion that everybody has to follow, then we find all sorts of conflicts and they cannot be resolved. Because look, when we say difference of opinions, 2 people who are having conflict, they both think their opinion is right. Hence they're not willing to give up. It's the Imam's opinion that erases the differences, as the one of the qa'idah says, the principle of the fiqh that says that Amr al-Imam yarfa' al-khilaf. The Imam's decree erases, takes away the differences. Because Amr al-Imam nafid zahiran wa batinan. That Imam's opinion decree must be implemented in private life and in public life. Okay? So we'll stop here, inshallah.